Welcome back. We're joined by Diana West. We have the privilege of speaking with her each week. She is, of course, the best-selling author of Death of the Grown-Up and American Betrayal, The Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character. You can find her writings at dianawest.net, among other places. Diana, welcome back. Good to have you as always.
Wonderful to be with you.
Well, let's talk about one facet of your insights from American Betrayal, which I think has resonance both with respect to sort of an anniversary we're celebrating today and also the times we're in. And it involves the effort made by the United States government to help our allies, as they were then called, in their fight against Nazi Germany. I'm reminded of all of this, of course, on the occasion of the anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of Britain, which was a close-run thing, I think it's fair to say. You have some thoughts on lend-lease that I think warrant our attention. How did it play into propping up the Russians as well as the Brits, and how was it engineered, in your estimation?
Well, it's quite fascinating because, of course, the Battle of Britain was essentially over by the fall of 1940. If it began in July of 1940, and it was essentially over, a British success by the end of, by the fall. Lend-lease came about in March of 1941, so about 5 or 6 months later. And it came about, it was sold to the American people by the Roosevelt administration and Democrats in Congress as a means to stay out of World War II, as a means of getting around our neutrality laws, which at the time were on the books, and allowing us to enable allies fighting the Axis powers to continue. This was seen by Republicans at the time actually as a war bill. They were not assuaged on this and saw this as a means to actually involve us. But what fascinated me on studying the legislation and some of the arguments around it was the notion that it introduced this very revolutionary aspect into our governance.
Diana West is our guest. She is, of course, a blogger par excellence. You can find her writings at dianawest.net, and also check out her marvelous books, Death of the Grown-Up and American Betrayal. Diana, you were on a roll here about a sort of revolutionary development arising from Lend-Lease. Talk about that.
Revolutionary and forgotten, I would say. But this is something I develop at length in American Betrayal. But to put it very quickly, Lend-Lease transferred war-making power from the Congress to the president, just like that. It essentially made the Congress, made treaty-making powers, made treaties absolutely extraneous, unnecessary. And it put foreign policy firmly in the White House itself, in the person of Harry Hopkins, as a matter of fact, who was the first administrator of Lend-Lease and always the guiding spirit of it. And it also brought this aspect, this notion that America was now interdependent. This is the first time I think we see this notion of interdependence, of an internationalism that essentially, eventually, ultimately, to this day, eroded a concept of a national interest. And I think that this is really something that people need to go back and look at and try to learn from, because I think it is indeed revolutionary, and I think we are suffering from it at this point, very much in our own time.
To the extent that what you've really uncovered here and deal with, as you say, at great length and with copious detail, is the influence that was exercised in this period by communist agents. I'm wondering what parallels you see to our own time, Diana, as, among other things, was treated today to a report out of the New York Post, their page 6 sort of gossip column, no less, but the tabloid that covers a lot of what goes on in New York City and beyond, which talks about the prominent role that a woman by the name of Huma Abedin now enjoys, really at the pinnacle of Hillary Clinton's organization, and that nothing is done without her assent. Remind us of who Huma Abedin is and what it might mean if this particular individual happens to have that kind of influence with a potential presidential, well, not just candidate, but ultimately a president.
Well, the parallels are striking with communist penetration, and as we've seen, Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic penetration, Saudi penetration, Iranian influence and penetration. Your question, who Huma Abedin is exactly the question that should be asked and focused on and really drilled down. Because what we know of Huma Abedin, her own biography, makes this a compelling national security issue. She is a deeply connected by family connections and professional connections to Muslim Brotherhood superstructure, coming out of Saudi Arabia, coming out of her parents' foundation that was founded by a man by the name of Nassif, who was also a founder of something called Rabita Trust, which was designated a terrorist-supporting organization. I mean, the biographical data that Huma Abedin, by law, had to put down on the pages of her security clearance application should have been red flags that automatically ejected her from any consideration for the kind of top secret or ultra top secret security clearance she has enjoyed as a top aide to Hillary Clinton for all of these many years. So who she is something that really needs to be asked, more than just us peering around looking around the edges and looking at these obvious red flags. This has to be taken to a much greater level of scrutiny because the obvious links to Muslim Brotherhood entities are so staggeringly dense and real. So this becomes a true issue. We can compare it to the old days where we saw people rising to the top of the State Department, to parallel with Huma Abedin, advising Secretary of State Stettinius, a man by the name of Al-Jarhiss, who was later revealed to have been an officer of Soviet military intelligence. This is the kind of danger that we fall prey to by not truly vetting this kind of senior staff to principals who are seeking national office.
But speaking of parallels, Diana, there's another one, and you mentioned him earlier. Let me just read you a quote from this article in the New York Post, and I think it's quoting Politico, a reporter by the name of Annie Carney, who says, quote, "Huma's influence is so pervasive and Hillary's dependence on her so total that it is expected she will have her own bedroom upstairs in the White House."
Oh, heavens. Yes.
So what do you make of that?
Well, my first thought bubble goes to Harry Hopkins.
There you go.
Who was Franklin Roosevelt's absolutely indispensable aide, and who indeed had the Lincoln bedroom while he lived in the White House from 1940 to the end of 1943. He had breakfast, lunch, and dinner when Churchill came to town and had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with the president, for example. I mean, his influence was so deep and so pervasive that really things did not get done without his initials on the order, coming even to the exclusion of Roosevelt. It had to have Hopkins imprimatur, and he was very widely criticized by Roosevelt foes as co-president or a Rasputin. Others who liked Roosevelt, just talked about him as the indispensable aide. But this man, unconfirmed and unvetted, occupied a position of power and essentially assembled his own shadow cabinet. Most people going throughout the military and the policies establishments of significant power actually owed their career trajectory to Hopkins. So if we see a Huma Abedin at such a level, will she be confirmed? Will she just be an advisor who does not require confirmation? Will she set up a shadow cabinet as Hopkins did? And we have much evidence that Hopkins was so pro-Soviet that he was actually on the other side, or certainly acting with the other side's interests at heart.
And we cannot afford to have a similar kind of arrangement with the Muslim Brotherhood, needless to say. Diana West, we have to let it go at that. We're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us, as always. It's great to talk with you. We look forward to doing so again very soon. Next up, we'll talk with Congressman Ken Buck about the electromagnetic pulse threat and also that coming across our borders. Straight ahead.